There were men who lived inside a quiet that was not of their own making. It was a stillness settled upon them by loss, a silence that filled the spaces where laughter and conversation once lived. Samuel Blackwood was such a man. The silence had found him 7 years ago, on the day he had buried his wife, Martha, and it had stayed, becoming as much a part of his home in Millhaven, Colorado, as the stone hearth and the timber walls. His ranch was his life, a sprawling piece of land that demanded everything he had. The work was honest and hard, and he was grateful for it. It left him too tired at the end of the day for the kind of thinking that could pull a man under. He rose before the sun, worked until the last of its light was gone, and fell into bed with the ache of his labor as his only companion. It was a life, he told himself. It was enough. Samuel was 42, a man built of the same sturdy, weathered material as the fences he mended. He had stopped expecting more from the world than what the land and the seasons would give him. Friendship existed in the form of a weekly trip to town and a shared drink with George Alcott, but connection, the deep, resonant kind he had once known, felt like a story from another man's history. He had not noticed when the old Miller place was sold. The property bordered his own to the east, a sad, neglected patch of earth that had lain fallow for years. He only became aware of its new occupants one Tuesday in late spring when he saw a thin plume of smoke rising from its chimney. He watched it for a moment from his porch, a flicker of curiosity stirring in the quiet of his mind, before he dismissed it and returned to his work. His first proper encounter with them happened 2 weeks later. He was riding the fence line along the creek that served as a border between their properties when he saw a figure struggling with a fallen cottonwood. It was a woman, and she was tall, nearly as tall as he was, which was the first thing his mind registered. The second was that she was trying to move a log far too heavy for any one person, using a length of rope and a stubborn will. He dismounted and walked toward her, his steps quiet on the soft earth. She did not hear him approach until he was nearly there. When she turned, her face was flushed with effort, a smudge of dirt on her cheek. She had clear, steady eyes the color of a winter sky, and a mouth that looked as if it had forgotten the habit of smiling. "That's a two-man job," Samuel said, his voice rusty from disuse. She straightened up, wiping a hand on her trousers. She wore man's work clothes, practical and worn. "It appears I am only one woman," she replied, her voice even, without a trace of helplessness. "But the fence needs mending, and the tree is in the way." He nodded, looking from the tree to the broken section of fence. "I am Samuel Blackwood. This is my land." "Eleanor Vance," she said. A boy of about 10 appeared from behind a cluster of aspens, holding a small axe. He had his mother's serious eyes. "This is my son, Thomas." Samuel gave the boy a nod. "Let me give you a hand." He did not wait for an answer. He took one end of the log, and together, with him pulling and her leveraging a thick branch as a pry bar, they managed to roll the heavy trunk aside. Throughout the work, she said little, but her movements were efficient and strong. She understood leverage and effort. She was capable. When they were done, she offered him a drink from her canteen. The water was cool and clean. "I thank you, Mr. Blackwood. It's what neighbors do," he said simply. He lingered for a moment, an unfamiliar awkwardness settling over him. He wanted to ask her story, how she came to be here, but the words would not form. He had forgotten how to make them. So he just nodded again and turned back to his horse. That night, he thought about her. He thought about her height, the directness of her gaze, and the quiet competence in her hands. He thought about the boy, standing silently by his mother's side, a small protector. They were alone, it seemed, trying to carve out a life on a piece of land that had broken bigger men. The next Thursday, his regular supply day, in Millhaven, he saw her again. She was leaving the office of Daniel Harmon, the town banker. Her back was straight, but Samuel saw a tension in her shoulders that she had not shown at the creek. As she passed the window of the general store where he stood, he heard her say to her son, in a low, determined voice, "We will make it work, Thomas. We will stay." It was not a plea so much as a promise. It was George Alcott who gave him the rest of his story that evening over whiskey. "That's the widow Vance," George said, wiping foam from his mustache. Bought the old Miller place sight unseen. Husband died of fever on the trail out here, they say. Used the last of their money on that worthless land. Harmon gave her a loan for seed and supplies, but he's betting she won't last the winter. Samuel said nothing, just stared into his glass. A widow. He understood the shape of that particular silence. She's a worker, though, George continued, oblivious to Samuel's inner stillness. Town folk are watching. Some say she's foolish. Others admire the grit. She's tall, too. Stands out. I know, Samuel said quietly. George gave him a sharp look. Oh, you've met her, have you? Helped her with a tree on the fence line, Samuel admitted. George grinned. Is that so? Well, keep an eye on her, Sam. A woman like that, alone with a boy, it's a hard road. Samuel found that he did not need the reminder. Over the following months, his gaze drifted east more often than he cared to admit. He saw her and the boy working from sunup to sundown. They cleared rocks from the fields, patched the leaky roof of the cabin, and planted a garden that grew with a stubborn, defiant life. He saw her teaching the boy how to handle an axe, how to mend a harness. She did not coddle him. She taught him. Their encounters were brief and practical. Once, her well pump broke, and he spent a morning helping her fix it. She worked beside him, handing him tools, her knowledge of the mechanics surprising him. She learned quickly, watching his every move, and by the end, he was certain she could fix it herself the next time. She thanked him by giving him a jar of wild berry preserves. It was the best he had ever tasted. Another time, one of her 2 milk cows fell ill. He rode over and showed her how to treat the bloat, a simple remedy his own father had taught him. She listened with a focused intensity, her brow furrowed in concentration. Her hands were gentle but firm on the animal. The cow recovered. She did not offer him payment, but the next day, a pail of fresh milk was sitting on his porch when he woke. He began to look for her on Thursdays in town. Their conversations were never long. They spoke of the weather, the price of feed, the stubbornness of the soil. Yet, in those small exchanges, he learned things. He learned she had been a schoolteacher back east. He learned her son was a quiet boy who loved to read. He learned she possessed a dry, understated wit that appeared in fleeting moments. One afternoon, as he was loading sacks of grain into his wagon, she was there, waiting for the smith to finish with her plow blade. He had just finished a long and complicated negotiation with the feed store owner. "You have more patience than I do, Mr. Blackwood," she commented, a faint smile touching her lips. "I heard you from across the street." "He's a stubborn man," Samuel said. "And you are a persistent one," she returned. The way she said it was a simple observation, a statement of fact, but it made him feel seen. It was a feeling so foreign he did not know what to do with it. The summer turned to fall. The gold evening light slanted across the valley, and the aspens on the mountains turned a fiery yellow. The Vance farm was beginning to look like a place where people lived, not just survived. The fences were mended, the cabin was solid, and rows of harvested vegetables were stored for winter. She had done it. She had held on. Samuel found himself thinking about her at odd times. He would be mending a fence and wonder if hers was holding up. He would be eating his solitary supper and wonder if she and the boy were eating well. These thoughts were unwelcome intruders in the quiet order of his life. They stirred a part of him he had thought long dead and buried with Martha. He felt a dull, persistent ache of confusion. He did not want to feel these things. George, of course, saw it all. "You've been staring at her all evening," he said one night at the saloon. Samuel had been watching Eleanor talk to the blacksmith's wife. "I was not," Samuel said, too quickly. George just laughed. "Sam, a blind man could see it. You follow her with your eyes like a hawk. You're just too thick-headed to know what it is you're looking at." "She's a neighbor," Samuel insisted, his voice low and firm. "A widow trying to make her way. I'm just keeping an eye out." "You keep an eye out much longer, and she'll be spoken for," George warned, his tone suddenly serious. "Mr. Abernathy from the Mercantile has been bringing her goods himself instead of sending his delivery boy. And he's a good man, a widower himself, looking for a wife." The words landed like stones in Samuel's gut. Abernathy, a portly, respectable man with a thriving business and a kind smile. Of course, he would be interested in a woman like Eleanor. She was strong, decent, and capable. She would make a fine wife for any man. The thought was like acid. He told himself it was not his concern. He had no claim on her. His life was set. He had his ranch, his work, his quiet. He had loved a woman once, with his whole heart, and he did not believe a man was given that chance twice. To want it again felt like a betrayal of Martha's memory, a ghost he still spoke to in the dead of night. But the image of Abernathy smiling at Eleanor, of him helping her into her wagon, began to haunt him. The following Thursday confirmed George's warning. Samuel saw them himself. Abernathy was standing by Eleanor's wagon, his hat in his hands, speaking to her in a low, earnest tone. She was listening, her expression unreadable. Thomas stood beside her, watching the store owner with a wary stillness. Abernathy then reached into his own wagon and produced a small bag of candy for the boy, who took it with a polite but hesitant thank you. Samuel stood across the street, a sack of flour forgotten on his shoulder, and watched the scene unfold. He felt a cold, sharp pang in his chest that he recognized with sickening clarity: jealousy. It was a raw, possessive feeling that had no right to exist. He had done nothing to earn it. He was just a man who fixed her pump and offered advice about a sick cow. He was a neighbor, nothing more. He loaded his wagon in a haze and started the long ride home. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road. The air was crisp with the coming winter. Usually, he found a deep peace in this ride, a quiet satisfaction at the end of a productive day. But not today. Today, his mind was a storm. He saw Abernathy's kind, hopeful face. He saw him offering candy to her son. He saw him as a good provider, a respectable man who could give her a comfortable life in town, a life far easier than the one she was clawing from the unforgiving soil. Abernathy could offer her security. All Samuel had to offer was more hard work and a house filled with the ghost of another woman. He passed the turnoff to his own ranch and continued down the road, his horse following the familiar path without guidance. He found himself at the creek, at the very spot where he had first met her. He dismounted and stood by the water's edge. The cottonwood leaves rustled in the breeze, a dry, whispering sound. The entire understanding of something had just rearranged itself inside him. It was not admiration he felt for her. It was not neighborly concern. It was a deep, terrifying wanting. He wanted to be the one she spoke to in town. He wanted to be the one who made her son feel safe. He wanted to hear her voice in the quiet of his own home. He wanted her, and he was about to lose her before he had even had the courage to reach for her. The thought of her life joining with Abernathy's, of her moving to town, of the smoke no longer rising from the chimney of the Miller place, it created a hollow ache in his chest so profound it stole his breath. The quiet he had lived in for 7 years suddenly felt like a crushing, unbearable loneliness. It was not peace. It was empty. "I'm slow," he said aloud, the words swallowed by the sound of the creek. He had been so lost in his grief, so convinced his life was already over, that he had failed to see the new one beginning right at his border. George was right. He was a fool, a blind fool. He stood there for a long time as the sky turned from orange to a deep, star-filled purple. A decision settled in his soul, heavy and sure as a foundation stone. It might be too late. She might already prefer Abernathy. But he had to try. He could not live with the silence anymore, not now that he knew what it was costing him. The next morning, he rose earlier than usual. He did not go to his chores. He washed his face, put on a clean shirt, and rode east. He found her by the barn, splitting firewood. The rhythmic thud of the axe was the only sound in the crisp morning air. She swung the tool with a practiced, powerful motion. She stopped when she saw him, resting the axe head on the chopping block. Her brow was damp with sweat. "Mr. Blackwood," she said, her tone neutral. "Is something wrong?" He dismounted and walked toward her, his heart hammering against his ribs. He stopped a few feet away, holding the reins of his horse. The words he had rehearsed all night abandoned him. All that was left was the plain, unvarnished truth. I'm a slow man, Mrs. Vance, he began, his voice rough. Slow to see things. Slow to understand them. She watched him, her gaze unwavering. She did not speak, just waited. For 7 years, he continued, finding his footing, I've been living in the past. I thought that was all that was left for me. I was wrong. He took a breath, forcing himself to meet her eyes. I see you. I see how you work, how you care for your boy. I see your strength, and I've been a fool for not seeing it sooner. He paused, the silence stretching between them. I saw Mr. Abernathy speaking with you in town yesterday. He's a good man. He could offer you a good life. He had to say it, had to acknowledge the truth of it. But I find I cannot stand the thought of it. His confession hung in the air, simple and stark. I'm asking for your permission to come calling, Eleanor, he said, using her first name for the first time. If you're not already spoken for. If you would have me. She looked at him for a long moment, her expression softening. A small, wry smile finally touched her lips, the one he had so rarely seen. I was beginning to wonder if you ever would. Samuel, she said softly. Relief washed over him so powerfully his knees felt weak. Mr. Abernathy is a kind man, she continued, her voice gentle but firm. He offered me his hand in marriage yesterday. Samuel's heart plummeted. He had been too late, after all. He had been a fool. He simply nodded, his throat too tight to speak, preparing to turn and leave. I told him I could not accept, she finished quietly. I told him my heart was not available. He looked up, meeting her gaze again, a fragile hope blooming in his chest. You got there, Samuel, she said, a hint of her understated wit returning. It took you a while, but you got there. I'm slow, he repeated, a foolish grin spreading across his face. Yes, she agreed. You are, but you're also a good, honest man. And you fixed my pump, she picked up the axe. Now, if you're going to come calling, you can start by helping me stack this wood. And so it began. His courtship was as practical and steady as the man himself. He would ride over in the evenings after his own chores were done. Sometimes they worked together, mending a harness or reinforcing the corral. Other times, they would sit on her small porch, drinking coffee while Thomas read a book nearby, the three of them wrapped in a comfortable silence that was nothing like the lonely quiet he had known before. It was a shared peace, full and warm. He learned the cadence of her life. He learned about her husband, a dreamer who had wanted a new start out west. He learned about her fears for her son and her fierce determination to give him a good life. In turn, he found himself speaking of Martha, not with the sharp pain of fresh grief, but with a gentle, nostalgic sadness. Eleanor listened, her patient silence giving him the space to finally let some of the old sorrow go. He grew to love the boy, Thomas. The child was quiet and observant like his mother. Samuel taught him how to track deer, how to read the weather in the clouds, how to whittle a piece of wood into the shape of a bird. One evening, the boy looked up from a book he was showing Samuel and asked, "Are you going to be my new father?" Samuel looked at Eleanor, who was watching them from the doorway, her tall frame silhouetted in the lamplight. Her expression was soft. "I'd want that," Samuel said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "If your mother will have me." 2 months after he first came calling, he knew it was time. He went to the old chest at the foot of his bed and took out a small, velvet-worn box. Inside was a simple gold band, his mother's wedding ring. It was not fancy, but it was real, and it had been part of a long and happy marriage. He found Eleanor down by the creek, the place where their lives had first intersected. She was watching the water flow over the smooth stones, her hands folded in front of her. He came and stood beside her. "There is something I need to ask you," he said, his heart beating a steady, certain rhythm. She turned to him, her winter sky eyes knowing. He opened the box and held it out. "I know it's not much," he said, "but it's from a good home. I love you, Eleanor. I love your son. I want to build a life with you. I want to join this land to mine and make it one. I want to fill my quiet house with your presence." He took a breath. "Will you marry me?" She looked from the ring to his face. There were no tears, no grand display. There was only a deep, settled certainty in her gaze. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and true. "Of course, yes." They were married a week later by the Justice of the Peace in Millhaven. George Alcott stood as his witness, clapping him on the back so hard it nearly knocked the wind out of him. "Took you long enough, you stubborn ox," he'd whispered, a wide grin on his face. By the first snow, she and Thomas had moved into his house. The place, once so silent and empty, was suddenly filled with the small sounds of the family. The smell of baking bread, the sound of Thomas reading aloud by the fire, Eleanor's calm voice humming a tune as she worked. The silence was gone, replaced by a warmth that seeped into the very timbers of the house. Samuel felt as if he had been living in black and white and had suddenly, miraculously, begun to see in color. 10 years passed. The Blackwood Ranch, as it was now known, was one of the most prosperous in the valley. The two properties had been joined, the fields thriving under their combined efforts. Thomas was a young man now, as tall as Samuel, with his mother's steady eyes and Samuel's quiet way with animals. They had a daughter, too, a bright, laughing girl named Martha, after a memory that no longer brought pain, only a gentle fondness. One gold evening in autumn, Samuel stood on his porch, watching his family. Thomas was teaching his little sister how to properly groom a horse, his movements patient and sure. In the yard, Eleanor was tending to her garden, her tall, strong frame moving with a familiar grace. The setting sun caught the gold of her wedding band, a small, constant light. She looked up then, as if feeling his gaze, and gave him a smile. It was the same smile she had given him that morning by the chopping block, a look of quiet knowing, of shared history, of a love that was as solid and real as the land beneath their feet. He felt a surge of gratitude, so profound it almost buckled his knees. He thought of the man he had been, locked in his quiet grief, blind to the life that was waiting just across the creek. He thought of what he almost missed, of the family he almost didn't have, of the love he almost let slip away because he was too slow to see. Eleanor had not just saved a failing farm. She had saved him. She had waited for him to find his way out of the silence. It is a rare and precious grace to be given a second chance at happiness, but a greater one still to be found by a love patient enough to wait for you to be ready to receive it. The greatest things are often right beside us, hidden in the quiet of ordinary days, waiting only for us to open our eyes and truly see what has been there all along.